Let's start. Good evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining in person, and a very warm welcome to you and to those joining online. My name is Rinad Mansour. I am a senior research fellow with the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House, and also the director of the Iraq initiative. And very happy to be with you all, and very happy to have this all-star lineup to discuss the topic today, the title being Caught in the Middle, Iraq's Positioning in U.S.-Iran Tensions. We're joined today by, next to me, Dr. Denise Natali, is a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. She is the director of the Institute for National Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. She previously served as the Assistant Secretary for Conflict and Stabilization Operations at the Department of State in the U.S. Next to Denise, we have Dr. Hamid Reza Azizi, who is a visiting fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, SWP, in Berlin. He was an assistant professor of regional studies at Shahid Beheshti University previously. We then have Sajjad Jihad, who is a fellow at the Century Fund International and director of the Shia Politics Working Group. He's an Iraqi political analyst based in Baghdad, managing director of Bridge, an Iraqi non-government organization and consultancy focused on development projects. And a very warm welcome as well to Stephen Hickey, who is the director for the Middle East and North Africa for the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, the FCDO. And he was appointed Her Majesty's ambassador to Iraq in September 2019. So we have a sort of a panel of both experts, but also those who have previously in policy, to discuss one of the I think, big questions for the Middle East this year, which is, since October 7th, we've seen significant conflict and significant violence across the region, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen, of course in Palestine, Gaza, Israel, elsewhere. But Iraq has somehow remained insulated. Although Iraq has similar connections through axis of resistance and some of the groups, it's remained somewhat stable. And so that's the sort of puzzle that we will be discussing today, and looking forward as well what the trajectory of Iraq could be. Currently, Baghdad is stable. And in fact, if you look at the last 20 years, Baghdad is one of the more stable cities in the region as such. So the question is, what is happening, and is this sustainable for Iraq? Domestically, with the oil price being, for now, helping this, but also the consolidation of power in Baghdad. And really the question we then have at the external side is, Iraq has often been that battleground between the US and Iran. We see today US-Iran negotiations, and we'll wait to see whether, and we'll discuss this as well, whether these negotiations will reach a nuclear deal, or whether we will go back to a conflict, in which case Iraq could be, again, one of the arenas of conflict between the two powers. So from the US perspective, we'll ask questions around whether the restrainers versus the hawks within the administration in DC, who will be guiding US's policy. And from Iran, we'll ask, 2014 was a very bad year. How is Iran readapting to realities, and where does Iraq fit into that? And then we'll go on to look at the domestics and finish sort of with that, what the UK as well, the important role the UK plays. But first, Denise, hang on, I have a few housekeeping notes that I haven't said yet that I need to say. So this is on the record, so it's not under the Chatham House rule. It's being recorded and it's live streamed. We have an online audience. I am to encourage you to tweet using the following hashtag and handles, #CHEvents and @ChathamHouse. And this event is organized as part of Chatham House's Iraq initiative. Denise.
Thank you, Renan.
Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you to Chatham House for sponsoring this event. I just want to start off with my standard disclaimer that I'm here on my personal views, and these are not going to represent the United States government or the Department of Defense. So how is the United States, how is the administration approaching Iran, you're asking?
Well, maybe if you can kind of give us a sense of where, many people are trying to make sense of the U.S. administration and where it's going. If you can help unpick some of that, and then specifically on Iraq.
So I'll make it very clear, because it really is very clear, and President Trump has outlined this in the America First agenda prior to being elected, and it has stayed the same since, and that is the United States will approach Iraq, it will approach its foreign policy with this America First agenda, which is looking at the United States can lead the world, can ensure peace and prosperity by ensuring that American interests are served first. That does not mean isolationism, but it does affect the way the United States engages with the world and the types of alliances that it will maintain. A couple of things before we can get into the Middle East. This is an approach that's grounded in realism. It is not ideologically driven. This is very different from some of the previous administrations that have had an ideological tilt. And this is also an approach that rejects international interventionism or the democracy promotion missions and all of these events that had the United States everywhere in the world. It's selective. It looks at countries with bilateral relationships that can help advance American interests. So with that said, the United States is going to approach the Middle East with these priorities. President Trump said this from the get-go. We're going to end forever wars. And that still remains the same, working on Russia-Ukraine, working on the Israel-Hamas war and bringing the hostages back. That still remains a priority, and you've seen that with Special Envoy Witkoff. And the other part of the priority in the Middle East is deterring malign Iranian influence. That will remain a priority, and you've seen the maximum pressure campaign be reinstituted, and this administration has also, pursued other measures more forcefully, ensuring that these sanctions are enforced in ways that the previous administration did not, going after Chinese companies as well, lifting some of the waivers on Iraq, and also negotiating with the Iranian government in the effort to stop or prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. So it's preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, deterring Iran's sponsorship of terrorist organizations, and some of these other missiles that are being developed and destabilizing the region. That does not just mean maximum pressure as we did in the first Trump administration. This is also, as we said, potentially preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon by and through negotiations as well. And this gets back to the very non-ideologically driven aspect of this administration, which has, quite frankly, annoyed those ideologues who are, a little bit peeved that there are even these negotiations going on in the first place. So I remain cautiously optimistic. But again, this is a very pragmatic approach. And at the same time, if Iran does not agree, or they cannot agree to these negotiations, there will be a continued and very forceful enforcement of the sanctions.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hamid, Reza, on sort of from the Iranian perspective, following 2024, a year of major setbacks, how crucial are these negotiations with the U.S.? We've seen some hiccups along the way. How positive are you that they could actually reach a deal? And more generally, where does Iraq fit into Iran's adaptation right now in the region?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much to the Chatham House for inviting me here. Let me start by the very important point you mentioned, the year 2024 and the developments. So zooming out a little bit, what has happened, where Iran is right now, and the perception by the Iranian leadership itself. So if we look at the experience, the developments of the past year and a half, three things have happened that has pushed Iran towards some sort of rethinking and recalibration of its overall foreign policy and also military defense strategy. First one, of course, is the erosion of its regional deterrence network, the so-called axis of resistance. So, of course, there has been a strong ideological element to that, but in the end, when you go deep into the Iranian narrative of that, the main purpose was to prevent a war from reaching Iran's territory. That failed, and that failed drastically, especially last October in the Israeli attacks. The second one is Trump's return to the White House, the resumption of maximum pressure with all its implications domestically, regionally, and so on. And the third one is a very fragile domestic situation marked by things like, we've seen recurrent protests over social issues, economic issues. So on all these fronts, regional, kind of, let's say, trans-regional or international and domestic, there are fragilities. And I would say it's the combination of these three that has pushed Iran toward this kind of recalibration, as I call it, which includes, of course, negotiations with the United States. So this is very important in the sense that it is not just about sanctions relief. It is not just about economic dividends of a potential deal. Why I'm saying this? Because, of course, we don't know the exact details of the talks right now ongoing between Iran and the United States. And by the way, I see it as a positive sign because, I remember, we all remember the period before 2015, the JCPOA, whenever there was a lot of details about what was actually going on in the talks, it meant that, things were not going on the right direction. So this is a positive sign, I would say. But in any case, sanctions relief alone, that's my main point, is not going to be enough for Iran to kind of make substantial concessions on its nuclear program. Because an important element of that is, as I said, this kind of sense of fragility, especially at the regional level, sense of vulnerability. And when we look at some of the reports about the negotiations, like zero enrichment and so on, there's a reason why we've seen outright rejection by the Iranian officials, because to them, having at least the right of enrichment recognized by the United States is the only guarantee that there won't be future setbacks, caused by the United States activities around the region or against Iran directly, or by Israel. So throughout all these years, it turned out that the only thing, again, I'm speaking about the perception of the Iranian leadership, the only thing that prevented a major escalation, a major war, was not this regional network. It was Iran's threshold capacity, basically, or this kind of threat of weaponization should there be a military confrontation. So I can see some room for even major concessions, like, for example, halting enrichment for some time as a trust building measure, but zero enrichment overall, and this kind of, consortium as a replacement, regional consortium, for example, as a replacement for domestic enrichment, I really don't see as that as a positive. So it can go both directions.
Can I ask just very briefly, will there be concessions on regional networks? There's also pushback from the US and others on Iran's regional networks. What's Iran's position there, and specifically in Iraq?
That's very interesting because it started, Iran's changing regional position started before Trump and before all these developments, and it was regionally driven, regionally kind of oriented. For example, the deal with Saudi Arabia and what we are seeing right now in terms of Iran reaching out to Egypt, for example, or to a state of Lebanon. So these are partly, I would say, the latest round and the latest wave of that. This is partly driven by that perception that I said, that this regional network, this kind of attachment or support for non-state actors has not had the effect that it's supposed to have. So there is, as part of this rethinking, Iran is now, we can see signs of a shift from working with non-state actors toward the state actors.
So what does that mean for Iraq?
For Iraq specifically, it means that Iran's support for Shia factions will remain in place, but more in a political way. So Iran supports, for example, the factions within the Shia coordination framework, and it is supporting basically the new PMF law. Of course, as it gives the PMF overall seen as friendly toward Iran a formal status in the Iraqi political system. But we are already seeing signs of Iran calling for restraint, when it comes to the militias.
Okay.
So I would say trust building at the regional level is already happening. The escalation, we may call it some kind of tactical patience. I would call it strategic patience, and the aim for de-escalation. But overall, this is already happening.
Okay.
That's what I want to say.
Thank you. Sajjad, Iraq has somehow more or less stayed insulated from all these conflicts in the region, although it's deeply, networked across. How has this happened, and can this continue?
It's a good question. I think the fact that we've had stability for almost 3 years is a success. We would not have expected this 3 years ago, that Iraq would have been able to escape the tensions in the region, being involved in Syria or in Lebanon or in Gaza. The fact that this government has survived. There were doubts that such a government could last a year. Particularly with the fact that an important component of the political scene, the Sadrists, decided to withdraw. So it's a qualified success, and probably an unexpected one from an objective point of view. But of course, I think Iraq's stance has not really changed. Government policy, it wants to be friends with the US. It needs to have good ties with Iran. This has been fairly consistent. I don't think it's changed since 2010 or earlier than that. And I think the Iraqi government, the next Iraqi government, will also pursue the same policy. Iran is a neighbor. Iraq needs to have strong ties with Iran. It also wants to have a good relationship with the United States, with the international community, and it will do its best to remain neutral. Now, the most important factor in all of this is, in my opinion, the outcome of US-Iran negotiations. If there is a deal, Iraq will benefit greatly, in my opinion. If those talks break down, I fear that Iraq will have a hard time preventing conflict of interest between the two countries inside Iraq. So for now, the outlook looks positive. I'm actually optimistic about this. I think Iran and the US will reach an agreement, and I think that will reflect well for Iraq. But of course, there's also domestic pressures. It's not all about international and regional. There's a lot of competition internally. There is tremendous pressure in terms of demographics and resources. We know Iraq has not managed to diversify its economy. It's extremely reliant on oil. As everybody's aware, oil prices are currently low. They could fall even lower, and that puts tremendous strain on government finances. So there's other pressures in addition to the regional and international ones. But at least from my perspective, from looking ahead for foreign policy, for regional politics, it does look better, the fact that Iraq has managed to stay out of recent conflicts, and it does look good for the future.
Thank you. Stephen, in your role as the Director of Middle East North Africa at the FCDO, but also your time as ambassador in Baghdad, if we take these two scenarios that Sajjad has outlined, deal or no deal, where does the UK stand on both, and what are the implications for the UK, and what can the UK do in both scenarios?
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, of those two scenarios, we strongly support the deal option.
Yeah.
And we are working closely with our partners in the E3 to support the negotiations led by the US with Iran, and we remain cautiously optimistic that a deal can be done. I think the title of tonight's event, Caught in the Middle, Iraq's positioning in US-Iran tensions, it really reminds me actually of where we were 5 years ago during President Trump's first term. And I remember being in Baghdad during the killing of Qasem Soleimani and the attacks by Iranian-backed militias on the coalition. It really did feel then, 5 years ago, that Iraq was very much the square in which that conflict was being played out. And as you and others have said, I think it's very welcome that now in 2025 it does feel very different. I think it's very much to the credit of the government of Iraq and Iraq's wider political leadership that over the last 20 months Iraq has succeeded to some extent in not getting involved in the wider conflicts that have been happening. But I agree there's a real risk now in the next year that if the conflicts that we have seen over the last 20 months expand further, and they may do, I think it's very important for Iraq's stability and everything that the Iraqi government and the Iraqi society wants to achieve, tackling the economic challenges, tackling the climate crisis, reforming the security sector. It's so much easier to achieve these objectives if Iraq stays out of any wider conflict. I think to do that, it's really important that there is continued support for security sector reform and taking more control of the militias that provide such a threat to Iraqis, but also to wider regional stability. I also very much welcome the gradual improvement between Iraq and its other regional neighbours, in particular the new Syrian government in Damascus and the governments of the GCC. I think that's very important for Iraq's stability. And as the UK, we remain committed to Iraq for the longer term, to the long-term project of strengthening the Iraqi state, strengthening Iraqi civil society, so that Iraq can have the security, the prosperity, and also the opportunity that Iraqis so deserve.
Can I ask a follow-up question on Iraq's integration with the GCC, particularly because there was recently this Arab summit, and of course Iraq, has been encouraged and wants to reach out, but there still is this issue with one of its neighbors, Kuwait, very historical relationship. How significant is this sort of spat between the two countries over the maritime border, and are there ways to really get Iraq into that GCC?
Look, we are seeing the GCC, and in particular Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Qatar, have more and more influence in the region and in the world. And if we want Iraq to follow this positive path and tackle the challenges it faces, it has no choice but to have good relations with the GCC states. Now, of course, things have been bumpy, and maybe they will continue to be, but it's in the interests of Iraq, but also Gulf countries, that relationship improves. And the UK is committed to helping resolve, if there are any small issues, fixing those and building that partnership, because Iraq will need, over the longer term, yes, good relations with Iran, but also with the GCC and with Syria, and with Western countries as well.
Thanks. Denise, Stephen mentioned that this Trump administration is different to the Trump administration in which you were in. And one of the big differences is that Iraq is no longer caught in the middle. Under the previous Trump administration, the lens was very much through Iran. The lens on Iraq was through Iran. Has that changed now? And what should we be looking out for to kind of see whether it is changing?
The current Trump administration also does not prioritize Iraq in its foreign policy. The priority is, outpacing China. It's looking at our homeland security and our borders. It's looking at ending forever wars. So, similarly to the previous first Trump administration, Iraq is not a priority, and the United States will continue to regard Iraq through the prism of Iran. That is the way it is happening, whether one likes it or not. And so that is, to what extent is Iraq enabling the U.S. to enforce the sanctions? Is Iraq supporting? How can Iraq help the United States get these sanctions enforced and address Iran? It will be largely a security-focused look at Iraq. Does not mean that the United States doesn't engage with Iraq, but it won't be to the extent to which Ambassador Hickey talked about. How do we help Iraq build its institutions? I don't know if, there's been significant cuts across the United States Department of State in terms of our funding for these foreign assistance programs. And a lot of that is from Iraq as well. So I would not expect to look at the United States engaging in these institution building, civil society building. They can occur from private organizations, but that is one shift that I would think that is likely to occur from the first Trump administration. And there can also still be a regard to Iraq in terms of opportunities for business, opportunities for Iraq to lead security and to handle security and economic prosperity in the region as well. That can be through developing alternative energy sources apart from Iran. And that is where you can find some openings. But the United States will continue to look at Iraq or regard Iraq through the prism of Iran and the extent to which Iraq can deter Iranian-backed militias from harming U.S. assets or U.S. personnel. Again, you go back to these three questions that are asked across the government. How is this enabling Americans' prosperity, our security, and our stability? So that is the way I see it. It's much more narrow and much more focused. And the final point I want to make, because this does affect what we should expect. In the first Trump administration, there were much larger groups of people who were of the neoconservative ilk. And I say that because I don't want to get into the details, but they had a different regard of the way we engage with Iraq. And you have more of a restrainer group, which is we're not going to project American power by being in the region with our military forces the way these other groups are. So I would look toward that trend in our policy moving forward.
Hamid Reza, picking up on this point of Iraq looking to diversify its foreign relations in the region, its energy in the region, the development road, as you know, that goes to Turkey, not through Iran. To what extent, is Iran comfortable with some of these changes as Iran seeks, specifically on the issue of energy? Iran has been a major energy provider for Iraq, and it's given it some leverage. To what extent is Iran comfortable with Iraq's ambitions to be integrated in the region?
Overall, I don't think it is a welcome move by Iran from the Iranian perspective. And there's different reasons for that. One is, of course, when it comes to, for example, infrastructural projects, geoeconomic initiatives like the one you mentioned, development road. So from the Iranian perspective, not only these projects are kind of competitors, they are seen by some as designed to limit Iran's influence. And that's why they are supported as they see it, by extra-regional powers as well. So they look at the development road project. What they see it as a kind of potential challenge for Iran's economic role and kind of strategic place in the region. And if we put it in the broader perspective of Assad's fall, the kind of land corridor which, in the eyes of the Iranian leadership, was not only supposed to be used to transfer weapons, but also in a longer-term perspective to be part of a corridor, a transit corridor connecting Iran to the Mediterranean, to be part of the BRI. So then we can better assess or have a better assessment of the extent of the loss from the point of view of the Iranian leadership. This is the first point. The second point is the kind of diversification that Iraqis follows has a clear Arab element. And that is, again, something that is concerning, to say the least, for Iran. Look at, for example, the recent Arab summit and all the controversy and all the discussions around it, from whether or not to invite Ahmad al-Shar to Mohammad al-Sudani publishing in, I think it was a Sharq al-Awsat, right? The article on Iraq's place and the kind of the idea of intra-Arab alignment or whatever. So these things are seen with a lot of concern, because at the end of the day, this has been established Iranian policy to see Iraq as a stable Shia-dominated country, but not a strong nationalist country that would become a challenge. Because the history of the war with Iraq and the overall perception of being located in a region full of different geopolitical threats, this has been the main driver of Iran's quest for strategic depth. And the core of this strategic depth has always been Iraq. And it goes even beyond the Islamic Republic to the Shah era. Anyway, so these two issues are the main challenges as seen by Tehran when it comes to Iraq's multi-vector or multi-aligned foreign policy.
Thank you. Sajjad, I had two questions for you. One, with the cuts that, the U.S. cuts that Denise highlighted, more generally the cuts, will this impact Iraq in any way? And the second one, with what Hamid Reza just said in terms of Iran being a bit nervous about Iraq's nationalism or Arab nationalism, but at the same time Iran in a weakened position regionally, is there a moment here for Iraqi leaders to try and exert some more sovereignty from Iran's grip?
So I'll go with the second question first. I think
good, because that's the harder question.
Yeah, I mean it's an opportunity for a reset. I think the relationship with Iran hasn't been reset since 2011. That was the last reset. So pre-2011, Iran was very concerned about U.S. intentions, and it would look to disrupt U.S. efforts in Iraq because the U.S. was essentially saying to Iran, "You're next." And so Iran had a particular trajectory with regards to Iraq. It changed that in 2011 when U.S. forces agreed to leave and U.S. policy in Iraq began to change. So Iran's reset with Iraq, from an Iraqi perspective, hasn't happened yet, but I think this is the right time for it. And this is an opportunity for this government or the next government to really make a play for the sort of balanced relations and to ensure also that Iran is no longer as involved in Iraq's politics with regards to pushing certain groups to do certain things, or even political alliances, or choosing particular leaders. All the countries have influence. Turkey does it, Iran does it, the US does it, and others. But this is an opportunity for Iraq to at least try to limit some of that with respect to Iran, and I think that's positive. But also I think Iran also recognizes the major changes that have happened over the last 18 months, and also that it can no longer afford to run its policy in Iraq purely through the IRGC. This now has to be done as state-to-state relations. I think Foreign Minister Arakchi's visit to Lebanon, for example, is a case study of that. The fact that they want to engage on a state-to-state level rather than through, what you call them proxy groups or affiliates or whatever. And I think that's positive also for Iraq. So to me, again, I come back to the potential deal between Iran and the US. If that goes through, I would expect the Iraqi government, the next Iraqi government, to be more forceful in the way it tries to limit the influence of countries like Iran, but also likewise applies to Turkey and the United States. On the first question, in terms of budget cuts, I mean, it will have an impact on civil society organizations and programs, which, if I'm honest with you, I think the political elite will be happy to see. They're very nervous when it comes to funding by the United States for civil society organizations and so on. So it depends on which angle you look at it from. From the Iraqi political elite, fantastic. Great to see these cuts. Less funding. Washington has to talk to us directly rather than talking to various players to put pressure on us. But from local civil society organizations, maybe people who like to use the labels of liberalism and reformists and so on, it is catastrophic. The fact that I think Denise was saying 97%, the level of cuts with regards to Iraq programming from the United States, that is tremendous. And it's not like there's someone stepping up, either the European Union or the UK or so on. So I think that will have an impact, but in the grand scheme of things, in terms of the political system, I would have to be brutally honest and say it's inconsequential.
Stephen, you've been incredibly busy, I think, is a light way of saying it, in the last year or two. Where does Iraq fit in terms of the list of priorities for the UK, and where will the focus be moving forward?
Well, I think it's a good thing for Iraq that Iraq hasn't been at the top of the news agenda or at the top of policymakers' agenda for the Middle East for the last 3 or 4 years. And that's a reflection of the fact that we have seen greater relative stability. And as I say, that's in part credit to the Iraqi government for tackling some of these issues. I think for the UK and for most European governments, Iraq, though, remains a really critical partner for stability in the Middle East. You know, we've seen what happens when Iraq fails and how that can destabilise the entire region. Of course, most recently with the development of Daesh and the need for the global coalition to partner with the Iraqi government in tackling Daesh. So I think there's an awareness, a deep awareness and acceptance of Iraq's importance for regional stability. My own view is that with Iraq, it's really important that we take the long view, that we are not just distracted by whatever else is going on in the region at this particular moment in time. And for me, the long-term challenge is to build up the capacity of the state and of state institutions so that they can provide the stability that's needed. And also, the stronger the Iraqi state and the stronger state institutions, the less opportunity there is for outside actors to interfere, to destabilise and to weaken. And at the same time, we mustn't forget civil society. Foreign funding will rise and it will fall. I mean, there are a number of supporters of civil society in Iraq. The UK is a supporter, the European Union is a supporter. So we will continue to support civil society in Iraq because I think we know how vibrant Iraqi civil society is. We know how important it is to holding the political system and the political class to account in future years. So I am optimistic for the future of Iraqi civil society, and certainly the UK will remain committed to Iraq.
Thank you. I'll open up to questions. We're also getting questions from online, so I'll take two from here and then maybe one online. If you can just state your name and affiliation. Yes, please. Yeah, just wait for the microphone.
Hello, thank you. My name is Safia Hassan. I'm Youth Peace Ambassador of Save the Children for Sudan, and I'm also a campaigner for the Sudan War. My question is to Stephen Hickey. I'm curious to know what the British government's stance is on the Sudan War and what is actively being done to ensure that humanitarian aid is getting to the refugees in neighbouring countries, despite the recent humanitarian funding cuts that has been done to NGOs. Thank you.
Okay, so this is an event on Iraq. It's a very important question, but if we can keep the questions to the topic of the day. Yes, please. Here, microphone went away. Yes. Okay.
Jamil Gürsel, member of Chatham House. My question is directly to you, Denise. As an American who had worked with Mr. Trump previously, can Trump be trusted in the Middle East, and if so, why?
Okay, can you just give it behind you as well? We can take. Can
Jafar.
Trump be trusted?
Okay, Jafar Al-Ahmar.
Your affiliation, please?
Next Century Foundation. Next Century Foundation. My question is to Denise. Don't you think the sentiments of the Iraqis in general are deeply affected by the U.S. policies towards the region, especially Palestinian issue, where on the ongoing war on Gaza and the horrific pictures we see. Just yesterday, U.S. vetoed UN Security Council resolution to stop the war on Gaza. Don't you think this engulfs the sentiments against United States, as you are talking about? Iraq has to distance itself from Iran. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm also going to ask a few of these online questions. The first one from Mehdi Al-Shakriya. Your views on Ayatollah Sistani's role in the way forward for Iraq. And also a question from Haider Akhoui, a former fellow at Chatham House, who we all know. The question is, Iraq is often talked about as a hostage of US-Iran conflict with no agency, but what role do panelists see that Iraq can play in mediating between the US and Iran? So, Denise, maybe we begin with you. You had two specific questions.
I can't speak to how the Middle East, people of the Middle East can trust President Trump. I can go back and look at what President Trump said he would do if he would become president and what his agenda is today, right? And that is and so in that regard, he is doing pretty much everything he said he was going to do. I don't see any surprises. That's why I'm always surprised when people say, I don't know. It's very confusing what President Trump is doing. It's very clear. End forever wars. Stop killings, wherever it may be, so that we can also tilt and shift our priorities to where they are, which is in the Indo-Pacific, outpacing China, focusing on the border of the United States. So negotiating the end of the Israel-Gaza war, I don't think that's going to happen overnight, and getting some of those hostages back, but that is continuing. Ending the war in Russia-Ukraine, that's not going to be easy. That is continuing. So there hasn't been a deviation from any of this. So when I say the word trust, to me that would be, is this person saying they're going to do something and doing something else? And I don't see that. And again, ensuring that Iran does not have a nuclear bomb, and that this is not just about maximum pressure, it's also about finding alternative ways. Because President Trump has said, hey, we want Iran to be a beautiful, successful country, but you just can't have a bomb. So again, you're asking me what I think other people should think. I'm just looking at it in the perspective of, is the president doing what he said he was going to do? And the answer is yes. And this is also about, peace through strength, ensuring that there's a peaceful Middle East. But the United States is not going to be the one meddling in Middle Eastern affairs and telling countries this is how you should rule and this is how you should govern. And President Trump was very clear when he met in Saudi Arabia and when he was in his Gulf trip a couple of weeks ago. So, and that was received very positively, that there's also opportunities for business and growth and development and prosperity, and that is what this administration, in my personal view, is looking for the Middle East, a country where people of the Middle East are deciding their futures, not failed nation builders of the United States. The second gentleman asked a question. I'm sorry, that I wasn't really quite clear about.
It's about Gaza, and I think the question was.
So,
yeah.
Against the US because, and you want
the gap.
To distance itself from Iran, but the sentiments of the Iraqis are not against Iran; they are against the US policies.
Well, they can be both, but yeah. Okay, so the question is, I got the question. Okay, if I just quickly. So basically, how can the US square its defense of Israel with its relationships in Iraq?
I see what you're saying. Okay. So again, in my view, the United States is approaching this as Israel has been and will remain a very important strategic partner of the United States. Iraq is also an important strategic partner of the United States. But approaching the Iran, what has President Trump focused on when I started? It's America first. So how does this policy affect the United States? When we negotiated to stop bombing the Houthis, right? That was, you stop attacking us, open the waterways, and we will stop. We didn't say you also have to stop attacking Israel. That doesn't mean Israel is not a partner, but it was, how is this affecting us? It's been very clear. And we had this discussion of how this administration has a bit of a different approach and a much more focused approach on how this is affecting American interests. So again, I can't shift and say, the United States is now going to regard Iraq separately. It continues to look at Iraq through the prism of Iran. But this is about ending these wars and doing what it takes, whether that be through business deals, whether that be through X, to end these wars so that the countries in the region themselves can determine their futures.
Hamid Reza, can Iraq mediate between Iran and the US?
That's a good question. I mean, the short answer is that I don't think, speaking from what I understand from the Iranian policy, I don't think that Iran is going to give such a big credit to Iraq partly for the reason that I mentioned, the kind of strong multi-vector foreign policy pursued by Iraq is not something that Iran wants to see. And mediating such a big issue like Iran-US tensions, that would be, of course, a huge credit to Iraq. But that's not the whole story. I mean, to put it briefly, Iran's approach toward mediation, international mediation overall, not just on the nuclear issue, is very selective, very pragmatic, and it is very much case by case, determined case by case, you know. And on top of that, it depends on whether the actor that is expressing willingness for mediation, first, can it bring something on the table in terms of not just being a venue or a facilitator, but being an actual mediator? And second, whether it is, whether there are competing interests, like if we look at how Iran reacted to the letter sent by, transferred by UAE, the US letter, they responded through Oman. Why? Again, because they didn't want to give credit to the UAE. They don't want to give credit to Saudi Arabia. They do use these channels in order to lobby the United States not to attack, to tone down its rhetoric, all these things. But that's a different story. So for the same reasons, Iraq doesn't have something to bring on the table. And second, it can be problematic in the longer term, so I don't think it's going to be.
Okay, thank you. So moving from convener to mediator is still a challenge. Sajjad, I think you're the perfect person to answer the question on Grand Ayatollah Sistani, given that you've just written a big book on the topic, God's Man in Iraq.
Yeah, I think, as I made clear, Ayatollah Sistani is semi-retired. I don't expect him to be willingly involved in any sort of actions with regards to politics in the future, unless there's some massive crisis that requires his intervention. But I think more importantly, it's what he leaves behind, the legacy. And I think there's several aspects to it. Number one, there is not going to be a theocracy in Iraq. There is an alternative model for having a active religious establishment that does not get involved in politics. And I think that's important for Iraq. It's also important for the region, and also maybe a point of direction for Iran and maybe the future for Iran as well. So I think that's an important aspect of legacy. The second, the independence of the religious establishment from political actors in Iraq, from regional actors, from international actors, the ability of the religious establishment to intervene at important points has been well established now, whether it was the issue of the constitution and voting and democracy when the US was administering Iraq, or when, for example, the crisis of 2014 when Iraq looked like it was about to collapse, or at times, for example, when we had to force prime ministers to resign because there was a real concern that the political system would break down. So that legacy is well established, the protection of the religious establishment, and I think the fact that a very clear rejection of theocracy, to me, these points of legacy will remain. So whoever succeeds him, whatever happens in the next couple of decades, I think that is probably the most significant thing he could have done.
Stephen, maybe some reflections on the question of Iraq's ability to be a mediator in the region, and
Yeah, I think, first, Iraq in recent years has had some success as a mediator. I often think that Iraq didn't get the credit that it should have got for helping to mediate the tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia that led to the agreement in Beijing. But when it comes to the United States and Iran, I don't see an obvious opening there, to be very honest. I think it's quite a crowded field already. There are a number of countries already seeking to at least support and encourage those negotiations. But I think Iraq does have a broader role in encouraging a diplomatic solution between Iran and the United States, and also ensuring that militia groups in Iraq are not able to spoil the party and destabilize the situation.
Thank you. Yes, we'll take some question over these two neighbors next to each other. No, here. Yes.
Hi, my name is Dr. Sarah Razai from the British Institute of International and Comparative Law. With regards to the initial comment made by Dr. Nathalie on the realist approach to international relations and how the US-America First policy. I kind of want to just throw this out to the panel members. Thank you for a very informative talk, but can you please just elaborate on the US commitment to international law? And a bit of thoughts from the ambassador and from the panel members as well. So how does international law fit into all of this? And do you see a relevance of international law moving forward? Thank you.
And you can, with your...
Hello, I'm Sarah Al-Kashlock. I'm also from the British Institute of International and Comparative Law. So my question kind of regards to the current and regional state in Iraq. Specifically, the central government of Baghdad has accused the Kurdish regional government of smuggling for oil. So there's tensions domestically that I feel like is not really addressed. And beyond that, with the fall of Assad, we have the issues of militarization. In Bush's administration, there was the discussions of withdrawing troops, but now the Iraq's government is calling for stability with remaining troops in Iraq. So again, there's the change, the shift in the political climate in the region.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question here. We're waiting very patiently. You have the best seat over. Welcome.
This chance. My name is Ibrahim Aziz. I'm from Salahuddin University from Kurdistan, from Erbil. Nice to see you, Dennis, for a long time, 17 years. You taught me in Boston. Nice to see you. My question for you is, you have a failed country, a failed state, which is based on the consensus, democracy, constitutionalism.
You're talking about the U.S.?
No. Iraq.
Okay, no, I just
That's not. We have a failed country. It is the Iraqi state, based on the constitutionalism, power sharing. That system has been supported by the U.S. at the beginning and still receiving the support for that kind of system, political system. For how long the United States will support this kind of system?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to take two more questions online and then come back to the panel. One from the EU ambassador to Iraq, Thomas Saylor. Stabilization of Iraq is certainly the key objective for the years ahead. Progress is slow, corruption still large. The population is losing patience despite the positive trend. The EU supports stabilization as much as possible. Would the panel see a role of the EU in regional cooperation of Iraq with its neighbors? And another question from Mervyn Kensington. Given that Iraq has a youth and vibrant population, how do you see the youth's role in shaping Iraq's foreign policy? Are there particular aspirations of concerns that they express regarding U.S.-Iran relations? So, Denise, do you want to begin?
Sure. I will address your question. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't study international law, so I can just give you my interpretation of how this administration would approach global agreements, or there's often referred to the liberal international order, and there's a big, people are upset that what's happening to the liberal international order. That's one way of looking at it. Some folks in this administration would say, well, the liberal international order is a euphemism. It hasn't brought order. The liberal international order is favorable to certain countries of the world, but not to a good deal of other countries in the world. So, this liberal international order was devised, after World War II, and you have a whole system here that this doesn't necessarily bring order, and it's not necessarily set in what international law that benefits whom. So, there's a counter argument here, and that's the approach. And the second part, again, is if you're looking at an American First agenda, how does this liberal international order that was devised how many decades ago advance American interests? So you can either have an international order devised that's set upon people, or you can have a decentralized form of order, where instead of multilateral agreements, you have bilateral agreements. You can have multilateral organizations, but in this administration, how does that advance U.S. interests? So that is the way that they would approach it. Who is enforcing international law? And again, I go back to who does this benefit and who does it not benefit? So that's the approach to that. There was another question about Iraq is a failed state. Yeah. So, not the United States.
Yeah, because it said you, so I wasn't sure
I know. It's very good to see you. I used to teach at Salahuddin University years ago as well. So, but the United States, my understanding is the official policy has not changed, that the United States supports a unified, democratic, and prosperous Iraq, and they will continue to work with the Iraqi government to do so. Now, I would expect to see a shift in attention. There was years ago, there was a lot of attention, right? We were going to go in and fix Iraq and really hunker down on getting the KRG and Baghdad together to develop this consociational system. You're going to see us stepping back from that. It doesn't mean that the commitment to Iraq, that the policy is going to change, but a less efforts or investments being made into making sure that we're building the institutions of the Iraqi state. So that, that doesn't mean we don't support it, but how can Iraqis themselves do this as opposed to the very activist approach that was taken for many, many years. That's probably the shift that I would see taking, but I don't see the United States getting on and saying, okay, that's not going to work, so let's support an independent Kurdistan region, for example.
And on that, Sajjad, if you can come in on the question of Baghdad-Erbil relations. The Prime Minister of the Kurdistan region was recently in Washington and signed several major deals, and the Sudani government replied by saying, we don't recognize these legally. How much do you see this as a problem moving forward? How do you see the relationship moving? We don't have that much time.
Well, I mean, I think it's obvious that this dispute between the central or the federal and regional governments can be settled legally. I think there has to be a political agreement. And the last political agreement goes back to, I would say, 2005. So until we have an update of that, I think these issues will persist. Federal government is always going to push for centralization, for control of resources. Regional government will always push for more rights and the ability to act independently of federal government. That's just normal. Happens in other countries as well. Of course, Iraq is in a different position where we don't have that much experience with settling these disputes. So it's gone to federal Supreme Court. And there's been international arbitration vis-a-vis exports via Turkey. But to me, it's very obvious. There needs to be a political settlement. There needs to be an agreement in order to facilitate the good relationship between Baghdad and Erbil. Right now, we have issues between Erbil and Soleimani, and then we have issues between Erbil and Baghdad, and then we have issues between Baghdad and Turkey, Baghdad and the US, and so on. So all of these, to me, cannot be settled through legal measures. They have to be a political agreement to reach a solution for these.
Stephen, maybe over to you on this question as well.
Yes, very, very quickly. I mean, first on the question about Iraq's political system, I agree with Denise. It won't be for the United States or the United Kingdom to determine or influence Iraq's political system. It's for Iraqis. And we're in a different space to where we were 20 years ago. And yes, there are problems and the challenges with the current system, but it's going to need to be Iraqis who are going to need to address those challenges. Yes, with support and technical assistance from the West, but we won't be leading that. Second, on the EU question, I mean, personally, I think it's a fantastic thing that the EU is much more engaged in Iraq than it has been for a long time. We really welcome the EU's expertise and technical assistance in stabilisation, and I would welcome the EU playing even more of a role in convening regional partners to support Iraq. And then finally, on international law, I think it's great to get a question about international law in the Middle East. I think we should be talking more about international law. I think it's at the heart of so many of the region's problems, whether it is in Iran, whether it's disputes between countries, whether it's applying international law to the different conflicts in the region. And the UK government strongly supports international law, the ICJ and the ICC, and we want to work with our partners to ensure international law is upheld. And I think strongly in all of our interests that we support the rules-based international system and international law.
Thank you so much. We've run out of time, but I wanted to thank Stephen, Sajjad, Hamid Reza, Denise for sharing these, your brilliant contributions and thoughts with us. And thank you to the audience for joining us for this Iraq Initiative event. And we look forward to continuing this dialogue and seeing you again soon at Chatham House. Thank you very much and have a good evening.